Hello, everybody, and welcome to Whispers Radio on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog, and UPRN, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. We are live here at the Market House Bar and Grill down in Elm Grove on Kruger Street. You can come on out, spend some time with us. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so excuse me if I sound more like Steve Novotny than I do me. I'm Jordan Klein. He's Nick Queen. And back in the studio making it all happen, the lovely Lola Miller.
Good evening, guys.
Hey, Lola.
I miss you, Lola.
I miss you guys, too. Don't sniff in the mic.
Try not to. These mics are really hot.
He's a disgusting man.
Oh. Thank you for dropping off my computer, Nick.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
Did you turn it on?
No, I didn't get here until not too long ago. So, no, I'll do that tomorrow when I get home from work.
Oh, well, don't thank him until you know it works.
Yeah, I was going to say. It's one of those things like, oh, give me the check before you do that. Let me go put that in the bank. No, it works. I was playing with it at the house before I left. I'm like, so it worked then.
Okay.
Now, if anything messed up, it was Steve and Dougie.
All right. Yes.
They crashed it.
I wondered why they looked so sheepish when I walked in.
That's why they were like, oh, well, we got to go, Lola.
Yeah.
They know what they did.
They're guilty.
Uh-huh. So, is it a nice crowd down there?
It will be nicer when everybody comes to see us.
Well, that's good.
I'm missing all my loyal subjects.
Oh, loyal subjects.
To sweeten up the deal, you know that the Market House runs a bucket of beer and a pound of wings for $10 on Monday nights, as well as $1 domestics and $2 well drinks. And they only do it till 9 o'clock tonight. We're out of here at 8, so come on down and spend some time with us. It's on Kruger Street. Great time. And this is like our St. Patrick's Day episode, Lo.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's coming up. What day?
Is it Wednesday?
I think.
17th.
Yeah.
The 17th it is?
Yeah.
The 15th, so 2 days from now.
Yeah, Wednesday.
Yep.
St. Patty's Day. And Nick didn't even get Patrick Heron for you. Or,
no,
Barry Fitzgerald.
Couldn't get a hold of him. I'm sorry.
Talk about the fairies.
I know.
But we do have a fairy expert coming on tonight on our second hour.
Okay.
Fairies and leprechauns. His name's Kenny Klein. It should be fun.
Yeah, it should.
Kenny Klein, Jordan Klein.
No relation. It's spelled kind of like Calvin Klein, so yeah, he's probably related to Calvin more so than me. There's a better chance.
Oh, my. Well, what is Catherine going to talk to us about today?
We're going to be talking about serial killers.
Oh, that's a juicy subject.
Oh, and not just like, well, I'm going to save those words. Because,
okay.
She's written like 27 books on like CSI and forensics and crime scenes.
What is her last name?
Ramsland.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I'm going to get her on the phone, so talk amongst yourselves.
You going to give us a topic? I do. I'll take this opportunity to apologize for my rude and harsh behavior last week. I said some things that were inappropriate, and I apologize publicly. I wanted to do it. We got some faithful listeners out there that let me know when I overstep my boundaries, to which it happens a lot, and I'm thankful that they're there. And
Hi, you ready?
I'm sorry. Jerry E. Smith did pass away, so that's a big foot in my mouth. I feel like a big jerk, and I do apologize. So
as you should feel like a jerk.
I do. I feel bad.
Told you last week you should feel like a jerk.
Yeah, but you said you warned me that after I said it.
Several times.
Which is never good.
Yeah.
Well, when he develops his psychic abilities a little bit more, maybe then he can kind of like transmutate the thoughts into your brain.
He can be like, hey, Jordan, in about 5 minutes you're going to say something really dumb. Just mute your mic.
Yeah.
Just tell Lola in advance. I'll just hold up a sign.
Put up like
2-minute warning.
I know. I'll have the dump button ready and waiting.
Yeah. The only time you ever have to dump the actual host.
Dumb or dump? I'm not sure what the button is.
Easy.
I know. These fragile people. All right. Well, we do have Catherine with us.
Nikki, you want to introduce the guest?
Dr. Catherine Ramsland teaches forensic psychology at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. Um, her latest book is Forensic Science and the Criminal Mind. We'll be talking to her about serial killers. Catherine, you with us?
Yes, I am.
I am so looking forward to this show.
Oh, good.
Let me tell you. Sorry. Uh, I've always had a thing to like. I wanted to just learn as much as I can because I've always been really big into psychology and stuff like that. Were you into psychology when you got into this?
Yeah, though actually I was teaching philosophy before I did this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what took you to the crime scene and forensics side?
Dead bodies.
So is this a love of the dead bodies,
darkness.
or?
Yeah.
So the love of dead bodies took you into the crime scene.
I didn't say the love of dead bodies. That's another thing.
Now is that more like? Now is that more like the interest of what the bodies themselves can tell you, or?
Yeah, I think just the fact of death being such a mystery. So obviously, I mean, some of my books are about ghosts and vampires and serial killers and forensic investigation. So clearly, I'm very intrigued with the whole mystery of death, whether it's in physical form, like the corpse, or whether it's in more ethereal form.
See, I know my wife's a huge. I told her, I was like, you don't want to miss the night because this is going to be, because she loves kind of the same thing, like the actual what the body, I guess, can tell you about what happened. She's the biggest fan of the show Bones, where they look at the bodies and they can kind of tell what happened, kind of who the person was, just by looking at their body. And so is that kind of how you got into it, kind of wanting to kind of unravel the mystery of what's there?
I think I'm more interested in the darkness inside of us, inside the killers. That's probably what drew me into
Which
it
is the
much
psychology
more.
side. I understand. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree there because you always want to know what it is that drives excuse me, what it is that drives somebody to do some of these acts, and it's never uh, the people you would expect.
Right. Well, sometimes it is, but often they pass as normal, ordinary people.
Now, serial killers themselves. I mean, you said you were doing philosophy. Um, when you go into like looking at the serial killers, I mean, first off, it's almost one of those things where you feel like you would get way too close, that it would leave like an imprint there. Do you think at times that's kind of the case, or are you able to separate, delving into these minds? Are you able to separate it out?
Well, I don't actually. I mean, I guess I read it differently than most
Sure.
people do who are looking for the entertainment value. I'm looking at it more clinically, trying to explore things we don't know and try to understand better. So I'm always looking at the details of one case after another to specifically look for patterns and to I guess disclose who people are, how they got to be from these little babies into these, killing people.
Killing machines.
So I think for me, it's that you really can have a clinical distance, especially because I've been a therapist, so I know how to keep that distance.
Now you were talking about kind of like the profiling. I know I was asked quite a few times before the show to make sure I bring up like how do I say this right? Okay, like let's say there's a killer that instead of just going out and randomly killing whoever with whatever means, it's always with a knife or it's always with a rope and it's always on a Tuesday and it's what is it that makes I guess these habits is it symbolic? Is it
Well, it sounds to me like you're talking more about fiction because that's the kind of thing you find on these TV shows or in novels or movies, and that's not at all true to real life.
really?
Yeah.
So how does it work in real life? Because I'm thinking, like the show Dexter.
Oh God, please don't even mention it to me. Most of that's bull, and Usually, if they're using, I mean, they'll use any weapon they want to. If they're using the same type of weapon, it's because it's what they're comfortable with. Like any of us develop habits, so do they. But you don't get, killers only going out on a Tuesday or only selecting a certain type of victim. They will have victim preferences for sure, but this whole idea of girls with dark hair part of the middle was so that was the Ted Bundy myth. Well, almost all girls in the 70s parted their hair in the middle. So it really amounts to nothing. They will have victim preferences if they are sexually oriented murderers, but we have many serial killers who have other motives besides that. Including women, by the way.
Really, there's women serial killers also?
Lots. The first documented serial killer is female. The one with the most victims is female, and the youngest, up until a couple of years ago, was female.
See, that to me is surprising because it seems like the media at least.
Because the media likes handsome male serial killers. Truly, when BTK turned out to be this pudgy middle-aged guy, they were very disappointed. That he wasn't like,
like Ted Bundy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There aren't many like Ted Bundy, by the way. Not many who are smart, not many who are good-looking. But, we just had one. We had a Rodney Alcala out in California who just got convicted, who was killing girls in the 70s, and he was even on the dating game, and he's very suave and sophisticated.
Really?
You know what? I saw all that on TV not too long ago, and he really, I mean, even though he honestly looks nuts now, it's like his eyes could roll in different directions. He really still is not a bad-looking man, and he was really good-looking when he was.
And he won the date, but she wouldn't go out because she thought there was something creepy about him.
Well, that probably saved her life going with that gut instinct.
Maybe. I doubt that he'd be so stupid as to kill the girl that he publicly
got a date with. Yeah. Although you never know with,
but
some people
he
nowadays.
Got away with it for a long time. He was a more organized killer, and I don't think that he would have taken such a risk.
Now, what about that woman in Florida that Charlize Theron played the part in the movie Monster?
Eileen Wuornos.
Yeah. I vaguely, I don't remember it happening at the time, but she really did get away with it for a long time, didn't she?
No, about a year. That's not very long. Most female serial killers really do get away with it for a long time because they're not suspected, and they're usually much quieter in their ways of killing. So they do get away with it for longer, but I don't think she got away with it for that long, not comparatively speaking.
How long? What's the longest a serial killer's been able to? I guess.
Well, I guess let's go back to Jack the Ripper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, he's not the first by any means, but that's the ones who haven't been identified clearly got away with it.
Now, is there an average of how long it usually takes for a serial killer to be found? Like an average?
No, there's no average. There's
no average.
Like that.
Now, what about
no formula whatsoever?
Okay.
What about like the Green River Killer?
Yeah, well, that took a long time. He started killing in the 80s, and it was in around 2003, I guess, that DNA finally nailed him.
Wow. Now, you hear about, the big serial killers, like your Ted Bundys, your Gacy's, your, BTK, but, this kind of stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
Right? And we never, is there a lot going on, like, recently that, people might not know of? Because I know.
A lot of stuff is happening in Europe more so than here right now. We often don't hear that much about European crimes, but there really is quite a bit happening in other countries. And they've only just been getting their ability to investigate serial crimes. They've only just become more sophisticated about that. So now we are hearing much more about it. But I'd still say I get news every day about serial murder investigations. I'd say there's anywhere between a dozen and 20 going on in our country at any time. And just because there's an investigation doesn't mean they're correct that it's a serial killer.
Yeah.
But there are suspicions, or there are trials going on. I think there's at least 3 trials going on right now for a serial killer around the country.
See, and that was something I'd always been told too. I guess another maybe myth from the media that the way it always was told to me was, see, serial killers is something that the United States has made,
No,
and it's something that we're, other countries don't have this kind of problem. And you're saying that's not correct.
not correct. First of
Okay.
all, I wrote a book called The Human Predator, going all the way back to ancient Rome. There have been serial killers in all cultures, because it's a human phenomenon. It has nothing to do with the United
Yeah.
States. And I counted, nor have we ever had 75% of the world's serial murderers in any given decade. That is
Wow.
a myth. That's just people pulling numbers out of the air because we are much more media savvy, and we put our serial killers out there in ways other people don't. But we've also had a much more sophisticated investigative system
Yeah.
where we've kept track of them with databases and with the FBI apparatus much more so than other countries have. So you couldn't possibly say that other countries don't have them. And in fact, many have hidden them, like Russia for a long time would say they didn't have any because it was a bourgeois phenomenon. But in fact, they had quite a few. And some of them, some of the world's worst serial
I was gonna say
killers.
I was trying to remember the guy's name I was reading about.
Chikatilo.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah.
he seemed like a monster. I mean, compared to some of the ones
There was
we've had.
him, and then there was the chessboard killer who was trying to beat his record.
Now,
And that was
can
in
you
the
kind of
past
tell a little bit about?
5 years.
Can you kind of go into those a little? Because a lot of people may not have ever heard
Yeah,
of it.
I've never heard of this.
Chikatilo, Andre Chikatilo was actually a school teacher who was fired for molesting young girls, and he began to ride the rails in Russia looking for wayward victims who didn't seem to have a place to go, and he would lure them out in the woods. He not only would kill them, but he would chew into them
What?
and eat parts of them raw. He'd chew out their tongues. He'd chew off their genitalia. Children, I guess his final toll was 56 women and children, male and
Wow.
female.
Now,
Wow.
and then the chessboard killer was trying to beat him.
Yeah, the chessboard killer actually had 64 squares on a chessboard, and he was what he was doing was he was finding people like homeless people and getting them drunk and dump them into deep wells in the park. The Bitsky Park killer, I think his name was too. And he wanted to. His first murder was the year that Chikatilo was convicted, and he always had aspired to outdo Chikatilo, but he was arrested before he made the record. Although he kept claiming he had more than Chikatilo, they couldn't find evidence for it, so they actually only convicted him of something like 48. And he was really angry because he wanted to be known as, Russia's worst serial killer, and they wouldn't give it to him.
Wow.
Now, what is the most that's known? What is the highest record, I guess, for
The
deaths?
highest is 650.
What?
That's a woman, by the way,
Who was that?
Elizabeth Bathory in Romania.
What exactly would drive
But
some?
the highest of our modern times is a physician in Britain with 250.
Oh no, this was.
Where they stopped finally counting at 250.
Oh wow.
Now he was the one that was killing. He was a nurse, correct, or
No,
a doctor?
no, he was a doctor,
Okay.
shipman.
I was gonna say I remember reading about him because he had that one was one that disturbed me because it's kind of the idea of going to get help and running into this guy that was
Now
just
he would make house calls,
oh,
actually.
oh wow.
Now we have had a lot of healthcare serial killers, male nurses in particular, but he was a physician.
That's now what exactly that you said in modern times? When was the lady in Romania? When was she worked
It's
or?
like I guess 16th century-ish.
And now what was she doing exactly to kill 650
Well, she
people?
was an aristocrat. No one could really stop her.
Ugh.
She's a very wealthy, well-connected woman doing all kinds of black rituals and
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Now I remember watching because I watch a lot. Every time there's like a serial killer uh, program on like History Channel or something like that, I always like watching it. Uh, I remember seeing one. It was I don't want to say it was 16th century. I mean it was like probably the 1800s, something like that. The guy started like a store in the downstairs, like a four-story like hotel type building.
Mhm.
Had like a store on the bottom floor, and people lived, up in the top floors, but like the fourth floor was like a whole floor of death, and like he had rooms where they just like kill people and dump the bodies down into like the basement where
Well, it
they'd
sounds like
burn
you're
them.
talking about Sweeney Todd.
Well, no, it's
No, I think you're talking about this country. That's H.H. Holmes,
yeah, that sounds kind of
the
familiar.
murder castle in Chicago.
That sounds really familiar. That might
Yeah,
be it.
he had several stories. He built this thing particularly with torture chambers and whatnot, and with secret chutes in the walls to slide victims down to the basement where he would deflesh them and sell their skeletons to medical schools.
Oh, that's crazy.
Nice people.
Yeah.
Nice people. Well, we've had a couple of phone calls with questions. The first one is, what qualifies a serial killer? Is it strictly the number of people that they have killed, or does it have something to do with the number and perhaps repeated methods?
The FBI in 2005 recently revised their definition. They're famous for having the definition of 3 different incidents of murder at 3 different locations with a psychological cooling off period between.
Mm-hmm.
But that became very problematic because, first of all, John Wayne Gacy brought young men back to 1 location.
Right.
So it wasn't 3 locations. So, and also we've had people who killed twice but were caught after the second who would have gone on to kill again. So you're going to say they're not serial killers? So they have recently revised their definition to be very simply 2 different murders on 2 different distinct incidents. There's nothing about weapons. There's nothing about victim types in their definition.
So that's kind of the difference, because that was always a question of mine, was you have spree killers and then you have...
Well, spree is, actually they took that out of their vocabulary.
They did? Okay.
Totally.
Because it seemed was a little, I guess, a little confusing, I guess.
Well, it's only confusing. It's not confusing to researchers because they really are distinct. Like I teach a class where I distinguish between mass murderers, spree killers, and serial killers. And the spree killer actually kills in a spree that's related to a single triggering incident, like Andrew Cunanan, who ran around killing people. Took a few months. He killed Gianni Versace. Took a few months, but it was all related to the single precipitating incident. Whereas serial killers go through a sort of a psychological phase where once they've killed, they relax until it builds up again. It's an addiction. And mass murderers kill all in basically a single incident or loosely related incidents. Mass murderers and spree killers often don't hide their identities. People basically know who they are. Often mass murderers are suicidal. So that for researchers, the distinctions actually do matter, but for investigators, not quite as much.
Now, going back to the John Allen Muhammad, who was the DC sniper, would he be considered a spree?
He was both. He started as a serial killer because he actually killed in distinct incidents in several different states before he then went on the spree in October of, I guess it was 2002.
Okay.
Then he went on a spree. So he actually ends up being both.
Huh, okay.
Well, another question that was called in, Caligula and people like that, would they have been serial killers or mass murderers?
Both. Again, it depends on what they're doing. We have a number of serial killers who also committed mass murder. Mass murder is 4 or more in one incident. So, for example, there was a serial killer in Russia who killed whole families, and he'd go from one house to another. So he's both. He's a serial mass murderer.
Wow.
And so Caligula, the problem with the Roman emperors and whatnot is that, they could do whatever they wanted, like Elizabeth Bathory, the aristocrats who could stop them. But he really liked being, sadistic and torturing people. So if he killed, serially, like, one person at a time, but then sometimes killed in a big mass, which he did. So he's both. And there's no reason why nobody who's a murderer stops to think, well, what category am I in?
Yeah, I know.
They just do what they do, and so it's up to us, the researchers, to decide how to make sense of them.
Unless you're the chessboard killer, I guess.
Yeah.
Because he knew what he wanted to be.
We got another call, though?
Yes, we do. Tom would like to ask you a question, Dr. Tom, you're on the air.
Oh, okay, thanks. Hey, do you find that a lot of these people have a particular agenda? Like, you have people that are wacky about their guns, or you have people who hate females, or people who hate a particular race, or
yeah, there definitely are what we call mission-oriented or visionary serial killers who, like Marc Lepine in Canada, wanted to teach feminists a lesson, so he went into the engineering school and he just went around from one classroom to another shooting women. So we have that. We have people who have racial hatreds or who want to rid the world of prostitutes or something like that. So there are people in that category who have a specific agenda, but others simply, some kill because they're angry, enraged. Some kill for sexual purposes. Some kill for greed. There's really a lot of different motives, but within what you're asking about are the mission-oriented killers who have a very specific purpose and a very specific victim category.
Are they the majority, the minority, or just
minority?
Where would Al Qaeda fall into all this?
I don't. That's not really what we consider a serial killer, because warfare is whole different.
I mean, religious fanaticism, that doesn't fall.
Well, it's fanaticism, but it's within a context of, their idea of war on us, essentially. So it's like, am I going to call, Bush a serial killer? No, I'm not going to. We don't call people who are in the midst of warfare serial killers.
Okay. Hey, thanks a lot. Bye.
Yep.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Lo, you ready for a break?
Sure, we can take a break.
Okay, Catherine, hold on with us just for a minute.
Okay.
You're listening to Whispers Radio live at the Market House Grill in Elm Grove. Come out and see us. We'll be right back.
And now back to Whispers, brought to you by West Virginia Penitentiary Tours.
We're back, gentlemen.
Hello and welcome back to Whispers Radio on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog, and UPRN, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. It is 6:38 p.m. We are live at the Market House Grill in Elm Grove. Come out and see us. They got a special going on: a bucket of beer and a pound of wings for $10. $1 domestics, $2 well drinks. Give us a call, 304-214-1600. If you're out of the area, 1-866-514-1600. That's toll free. Our guest tonight is Catherine Ramsland. We're talking about serial killers, kind of profiling them, talking about cases, all that kind of good stuff. Catherine, you still with us?
I am, yep.
Now, we talked right before the break, just kind of some of the cases and stuff like that. Now, we want to kind of branch into, is there a lot of paranormal aspect? Because I guess you talked to Nick and you talked about, some of the supernatural aspects that go into it. What kind of cases are involved with that?
Well, there are some people who think they're killing for occult purposes, like to get more power or to build an altar to the devil or something like that. I wouldn't say there's a lot of that, but.
But now, like that was you were talking about the Romanian lady. You said she was doing dark rites or black rites. What exactly was she trying to do?
Like anybody does, they think if they contact Satan, they're going to get extraordinary superhuman powers if they sell their souls or they deliver the souls of an innocent person. That's it's a very common thing from culture to culture to think that there's some supernatural evil person that can endow you with powers.
Has it worked for any of them yet?
In terms of immortality, not that I know of.
Now, I know. I'm trying to think back who it was, but what was the latest case of something like that being the driving factor?
Well, where in this country or
anywhere in the world, I guess.
Would it be like Son of Sam? Wasn't that kind of mystical?
He was just lying about most of that.
Oh, really?
Richard Ramirez in the 80s.
It's the Night Stalker, right?
Yeah, was doing some of that. He still carries on as if he's, you know, with the devils. If you wrote to him, he'd want you to be part of his satanic church kind of thing.
Huh.
All right, here's the biggie. What about Charlie Manson? I mean, especially here, we kind of have a connection to him because he was born just a very few miles downriver and wanted to be moved to the West Virginia Penitentiary in Moundsville for the longest time because his mother lived here or something. Even though he didn't kill anybody, is he considered a serial killer?
Well, first of all, he probably did kill people
that nobody knew.
They just didn't. They didn't need to really go after him over it. But his gang is actually suspected in 35 murders, not just the Tate LaBianca murders. And he's certainly high on the list of suspects. He was very likely there when they were killing either or both. But with the Sharon Tate murders, where they massacred 5 people in one place, he masterminded it. The reason he's in prison is because Bugliosi was able to bring a charge of masterminding it to him to show that none of these people probably would have been killers without him creating the plan and the fantasy and urging them on and manipulating them into it. So the reason he's in prison is because he was really behind it all. But there's a lot of reason to believe he was present. Even if he didn't pick up a weapon, he was present as the guiding force for that gang that actually committed the murder.
Do you think he was smart enough to think that if I don't actually do the physical deed, then I can't possibly be prosecuted for this?
He might have been. I'm not going to say he's a smart guy, but he certainly might have been aware that it would have been harder to prosecute him. He probably didn't realize that there was a law that would have allowed the whole mastermind charges against him. But I think he really expected he was going to get away with it because he was that narcissistic. It was one of his own people that basically opened her mouth and started bragging about it. If that hadn't happened, it's doubtful we would have found out exactly what was going on.
Wow.
Well, I think he's if there's any of the demonology kind of stuff involved with any of these, he has the appearance of being the devil incarnate.
That's the myth that we like to generate through these movies and stuff, and that's exactly why the actual real devil can manipulate us so easily because he doesn't look like Charlie Manson.
Well, but honestly, he looks nuts.
Because he plays it up. That's his persona.
I know. We were thinking about, kind of lobbying to get him transferred back to Moundsville, and he could do, like, floor shows, sell tickets.
Yeah, probably.
No.
Yeah, he's an interesting, he's definitely an interesting study for the way he was able to lure people and kind of stoke them into being a family. But he's very likely a killer. We just haven't brought the charges against him.
Well, I know earlier you were talking about CSI and all that kind of stuff and how it's television. But Patricia Cornwell, are her books as really realistic as they appear to be? I mean, a layman reading her books, you think that you're getting some type of an education anyway in how things are done.
Closely with. In fact, I was just with a forensic psychologist who's one of her models. She works pretty closely with law enforcement. She got her start as a clerk in a morgue, and she has set up an entire forensic science a curriculum with the whole institute and whatnot. She does work very closely with forensic scientists.
Because I think her books are brilliant, but that's from a layman's point of view.
Yeah, she stays pretty close. Like the Body Farm, that's a real place.
Yeah.
She stays pretty close to the facts.
That's good. That's good to know because I enjoy her books.
The only thing I would say is what she's probably off on is some of the serial killer psychology, and in particular, her Jack the Ripper book is terrible. frankly.
See, I haven't read that, and I tended to stay away from that.
She makes a lot of logical leaps that she should know better than to make. I mean, she has access to all the profilers and all these people, and yet she makes some pretty significant errors of thinking because she's so determined to prove that her candidate is the guy.
Who did she say did it?
It's this artist named Walter Sickert. I'm not even going to get into it.
Now, do you have a Jack the Ripper book?
With the criminalistics, but she's not so good with the criminology.
Okay. What were you saying, Jordan?
Do you have a Jack the Ripper book?
Do I?
Yeah.
No. I mean, I've read most of them. I'm not writing a Jack the Ripper book now.
Do you have any thought of who it might be?
I favor the candidate who was involved in the occult, who his name is Donston. I like him in particular because the way the murders are laid out is this almost perfect diamond shape, which indicates that this was not about the victims as much as it was about the place where each one was killed, and that somebody wandered across that place at the wrong time, and that the way that looks is very planned out, very organized, and much different than most of the people analyzing it think about it. But if you look at a map, it's just too perfect for it not to have been planned that way. So I favor him as a candidate.
Wow.
Wow.
You hear a lot of people, with their all their different opinions of why so and so did this and how this person did it, and like every Jack the Ripper show you watch, it's somebody else that they think did it.
Well, there's like dozens of candidates for Jack the Ripper, and that's because people are trying to sell books, and they do it because everybody buys them. But I think you have to be very careful about what really is evidence and what really isn't evidence. And a lot of, like with Patricia Cornwell, a lot of stuff gets stretched to make it fit that candidate, and that is not really the way to go about doing an investigation. That's begging the question, and it's not. I don't know. It's not very convincing to me.
Now, when you're looking at somebody, and you have all these kind of ways you can go about becoming a serial killer and so forth, is there any danger signs to notice in someone that has become? I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm sorry, but
are you saying are there red flags that would tell you to
red
be careful?
flags.
How do we know when Nick, finally
snaps
and hurts me
a
little?
You don't. I wish I could. If there were a way to tell you, I could probably make a lot of money writing books about that. You can see that in some, like a mass murderer, for example. They typically are angry people with very rigid personalities who make veiled threats about going back to the workplace, for example, like this woman Amy Bishop, who recently went to the University of Alabama and shot her colleague. And there were a lot of red flags in her background that people like myself who study mass murderers could have said, yikes, watch out for this one because she's showing a lot of the signals.
Well,
and but can you do it with serial killers? Well, serial killers aren't as uniform in terms of their approach and their presentation as a mass murderer is. We have serial killers all over the map, from idiots, who just get lucky, to really, deranged psychotic people, to the classic psychopath who knows exactly what he's doing and is quite a good predator and can pass as anything he wants to.
We had one in Pittsburgh. I guess he would have been a mass murderer. Walked into a gym and just started firing away. Yep. And all the warning signs were, he had a blog up that was talking about doing all this kind of stuff. He even had his date of death on the top of the blog, as well as like if he were on a tombstone. And yet no one seemed to pick up on it. And
we're not in a Minority Report kind of situation where we can go collect these people when they do stuff like that.
Yeah.
We're just not at that point in our society where we can say, aha, that person's going to commit a crime, so let's stop him first.
Well, and I think we're always, unfortunately, none of us really wants to believe that the person next door could do this kind of stuff. Now, is there any truth to the story that kids that are abusive to either smaller kids or to particularly animals, that those are all warning signs that could lead to some type of behavior like this?
Well, it might. They might just end up being bullies, or domineering bosses rather than
serial
criminals.
killers. Yeah.
So I guess I would say if a kid actually has to show a constellation of factors like deception, theft, a number of juvenile infractions, as well as cruelty to animals or other kids, something like that. If they're showing a number of what we call the fledgling psychopath traits, that child really is going to need some guidance. But that doesn't mean you're going to necessarily cure them, because if it is in fact a brain disorder, which it's beginning to appear to be, it's going to be very difficult to work with them.
Yeah.
Now, talking about those behaviors that you see, with the typical, serial killer, like what about the people that, go beyond just going and killing, and you got, the Dahmer, who's, cannibalizing, and
right.
the stuff that the Green River Killer did. What is it about them? What would you call what they have? Because that's kind of different than just going and.
Well, there's a necrophilia aspect to some of those where I was just actually on a panel in New York a couple nights ago about what we call collector psychology, and that is the type of person who keeps either sexual slaves around them or dead bodies or body parts or something to keep it close, because it helps them feel powerful over other people. And I think the same thing goes on when somebody prefers the company of a dead body, especially when it's maggot-ridden, because that was the way the Green River guy would describe it. He'd get to the point where there were just too many maggots, and then that was it. He had, can you imagine? But it does give them a sense of power over another person. They own that person. That person is now a thing in their world, a pawn in their game, and it makes them feel like God. That's what Ted Bundy said.
Now, is it more characteristic that they collect something like that? Because I know, Hollywood, they'll take like either an object of theirs or a certain, you got like Jigsaw from like Saw that cuts the little chest or the puzzle piece out of the the body or whatever.
Right.
Do you get a lot of that in real life?
Not a lot. Get some, but certainly not a lot.
Now, is there any certain case of people, that gave this mystique, I guess, of the trophy collecting, everything that the media feels that a serial killer should be? Is there any one case? Which case would that be?
There isn't any.
There isn't any? They just like
There's not an ideal serial killer?
There's no profile of a serial killer at all, and the FBI hates it when the media does that, as do I. There's no one factor that makes someone a serial killer. There's no profile, no blueprint, nothing.
But what gave them this idea then that,
makes them feel safe. What do you think?
Well, I understand that. But what, they have to have something where they can point back to and be like, well, this one was like this, so.
Well, a very flawed study done in the 1980s by the earliest of the FBI profilers on 25 articulate white imprisoned killers who agreed to talk to them, who clearly are not representative of serial killers everywhere. So from that study, they began to say that serial killers are smarter than the average person. They're usually white men.
Just because that's who volunteered for the test group.
Of course they're smarter. They're the ones that made sense to you, so you put them in your study, etc. So they were not representative, but what happened was that these guys, and I like them, they're my friends, but they started writing these articles that criminologists began to quote, and a lot of the myths that we now have about serial killers came from that extremely flawed study.
And always, hindsight's 2020. You can look at each case and say, yeah, that right there is probably when they snapped.
No, there's no snapping. There's a buildup. There's always a buildup. There's no such thing as snapping.
Okay, well, it looks like we're safe with Nick then, Lola.
That's good. That's good.
That doesn't mean he doesn't have had fantasies ongoing for years that will one day finally be something else.
That's
oh,
what
doctor,
it is.
Don't feed him anymore. Don't feed him anymore. Well, we are just about out of time, you guys.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, this hour has gone too quickly.
Oh, it has. Catherine, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun. We've been wanting to get more into this. I'm trying to get Nick to have like a cult month and serial killer month,
and I'm the one that everybody's worried about.
Yeah.
Well, sleep with one eye open.
That's right, Nikki.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Catherine.
We have all your books and your websites and all that kind of stuff linked up to the website, correct?
Yes.
Right.
At whispersradio.com. You can go there and check out her books, check out everything she's got going on. Catherine, we want to keep in touch because this was a lot of fun.
Good.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So how long do you think it's gonna be, Lola, before Nikki goes nuts on us?
I don't know, but I'm fearful now. And see, she got rid of the myths of all the things that we've been noticing about him, and now she's just kind of blown all that away. So I don't know. This could be real scary.
I'll keep you guys on your toes forever.
That's right. If I move and don't leave a forwarding address, you'll know why.
Why did Lola stop?
Why is Lola not here anymore? And why does Nick have that crazy look in his eye?
As long as he's not ordering bottles of Chianti, I think we're okay.
The reason I haven't went over the edge is I haven't figured out what I'm going to start collecting.
Oh.
He has.
I'm looking at Jordan's stuff like, what am I going to take?
Like, I don't want anything he has.
Every time Jordan's like, Jordan, what you need to get is this. Why? No reason.
So that I can take it.
Oh, that's scary stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's I was just the guy in Russia always man.
Yeah.
I never heard of
doctor, that. The doctor in England. It's just some scary stuff out there to keep you thinking, keep you from not wanting to go out.
Yeah, that guy in Russia, and I'll lay you 10 to 1. There are tons that have never been reported.
From the Soviet era, yeah. I mean, it's.
And I wanted to bring up something, but I didn't, just because I didn't.
What?
But I've heard a lot of people say that truckers would be able to get away with the long haul truckers that go country all across the country every week. They could get away with anything they wanted to get away with.
Wasn't there one?
I'm thinking there was, but I don't know the situation offhand.
And I know there was one that rode the rails, because all of the murders, and this was in Texas.
Yeah.
And all the murders were along railroad tracks, not very far off of them, because they drive right through neighborhoods.
Is that like in the 30s, like?
No, this guy in Texas was.
Was it recent?
I want to say the 80s.
Relatively.
And then he was in prison for something else, and I don't know if it was DNA. I don't remember the whole story, but it was in modern time. It wasn't, back when you had so many people, riding the rails and that kind of stuff. But yeah, that would be, if you really were of mind to do that. That would be one way of doing it.
Oh, did I tell you Nick just got a new job?
No.
He's a he tried to be he's a truck driver.
See,
I was trying to turn his mic off before he said something stupid.
All right. Oh, we've got to go, you guys.
Oh, so 7 o'clock, time for CNN News. You're listening to Whispers Radio on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog, live at the Market House Grill in Elm Grove. We will be right back.
On boy.
Now it's time for Whispers, your number one source for all things paranormal, with your hosts, Jordan Klein and Nick Queen, and produced by the lovely Lola Miller. Whispers is brought to you by West Virginia Penitentiary Tours. At the West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville, unforgettable, historical, educational.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers Radio on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog, and UPRN, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. It is 7:08 p.m., hour number 2 of Whispers here on Monday. There's a special here. We're at the Market House Grill in Elm Grove. $10 will get you a bucket of beer and a pound of wings, and $1 for domestic drinks, $2 for well drinks. That lasts until 9 o'clock tonight. Come on out here. Come and see us. I'm Jordan Klein. He's Nick Queen, and she is the lovely Lola Miller back at the studio. Lola, you with us?
Yes, I am, my dear.
All right.
I'm going to get Kenny on the phone.
Okay.
So, there you go.
Well, we're going to consider this part our St. Patrick's Day episode. Our St. Patty's hour.
Despite the fact that neither one of us wear any well, I got green pants
Well,
on. Up there, yeah, your rainbow bright tattoo.
Whatever.
That's what you're gonna pull out. That's blue still.
Whatever. I'm gonna go ahead and say anybody who brings some green face paint out to the market house can paint Nick and I green.
Why are you volunteering me this?
I'm volunteering myself as well because we got to get in the St. Patrick's Day spirit. So anybody who wants to bring out some green paint, body paint, not like
you guys. You're asking for big trouble now.
Come on out here.
I don't know if I'm volunteering.
We're leaving at 8, so you got to do it during the show. It'll be live on the air. You'll be painting us green.
Get to meet the. I was gonna make fun of Jordan last hour because every time he talked, he sounded like he was just getting into puberty.
Gee golly, Mom!
Oh, you sound so cute. All right, we have our next guest on the phone. Nick, you want to introduce him?
I can do that for you. Kenny Klein's new book, Through the Fairy Glass, a look at the realm of the unseen and enchanted, draws on folklore, to look at the true nature of fairies, which, Kenny, you would say kind of nasty?
What's that?
You would say that it's kind of a nasty kind of record, not a little more, not as Disney as made out as to be.
The folkloric record of fairies, the record from people, going back 1,000 years, is very not Tinkerbell.
What?
Yeah, very not Tinkerbell. They're nasty. They're creepy. They're eerie. This view that we have of fairies as being cute and small is a very modern view and really has nothing to do with the folkloric record of fairies.
Well, then you got to tell us what are we supposed to be really thinking of when we hear about it?
Well, in the book there's a lot of discussions about all different kinds of fairies, but one of the themes that we see when we look at folk music, folk stories of fairies is that a lot of them are human sized or even bigger, and they prey on especially young humans, anything from infants up through people in their teens and 20s who can be easily seduced sexually. Fairies will seduce humans and then murder them after seducing them. With infants,
kind of like a serial killer.
Yeah, they are very like serial killers. One of the memories of this seduction murdering fairy is in a very common childhood tale, which is Red Riding Hood.
Huh.
And in Red Riding Hood, we see this talking wolf, who is a fairy creature, who seduces Red. He takes her home. He's like, basically, he's like, come and meet me at Grandma's, baby. And she gets there, and she gets into bed with him, and, of course, he devours her, which, when we're 3 or 4, I don't know that we get all the sexual subtext of that story.
Uh-huh.
But we know she should not get in bed with this wolf at 3 or 4. And of course, she is eaten. And later on, the huntsman comes and rescues her. This is sort of a watered down or sanitized version of a lot of real fairy tales or folk tales that come to us.
Now, when we're talking about fairy, because you said the wolf was a fairy creature.
Or fairy creature.
Now,
yeah.
do I guess a lot of people's concept of a fairy is going to be drawn off of Disney.
Yeah,
You know,
Tinkerbell.
the little tiny creature with wings, and
Right.
you know, what exactly? I mean, like leprechauns, would they be considered a kind of a fairy?
Well, yeah, certainly they would. There's a large group of fairies, and elves would be included in this. We get our word fairy from English, and our word elf or elf from Saxon or some of the Scandinavian languages.
Uh-huh.
English comes from Saxon. It's a Scandinavian language ultimately. So if you trace the word back far enough, fairy and elf seem to have meant the same thing, which is an enchanted creature. So when you look at something like leprechaun, you're looking at a sort of a small, mischievous fairy, and there's a huge folklore record of these small creatures that make a lot of trouble, that are spiteful and mischievous, and of course Shakespeare cast one of them in one of his most famous plays, in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
That'd be Puck, right? Puck.
Who is this mischievous fairy. He's always trying to make trouble. He spends the whole play getting these two couples to each of them fall in love with the opposite sex member of the other couple. So there's all this, and he laughs at them through the whole thing. And that's very typical of a leprechaun, or Puck's name comes from puka, which means goat. So what you have is these little goat fairies, these half human, half goat creatures that leprechaun comes from.
Now, I mean, you know, I've read a lot of English. You know, you've got Mab, you've got uh, some of the other you know, the more famous, the Fairy Queen, so forth. A lot of them, you know, they always kind of try to romanticize what's there. I think I'm trying to think. Spencer, I believe, was the Fairy Queen.
Right.
It's been a
Spencer's
while.
Fairy Queen.
Uh,
Spencer's Fairy Queen is said to be an analogy to Queen Elizabeth I.
of course,
I
you'd
don't
want
know
to be
that
nice.
Spencer meant for his Fairy Queen to be seen literally as a fairy, and his contemporary audiences would have known enough about fairies to see that this wasn't actually fairy lore. But the Fairy Queen consistently appears to us as human size or bigger, and as stunningly beautiful, more beautiful than a human woman could ever hope to be. And so men are just looking at her, men are seduced. And usually, after she's taken a human to the fairy world, she keeps him as her lover for 7 years, and then she kills him. And one of the tales about fairies, and my theory is that it came after a time when the population of Britain and Ireland became Christian. After the Roman pagan times, when Britain and Ireland was Christianized, people needed sort of an excuse to go on believing in fairies. So they claimed that fairies are angels who did not take sides during the war in heaven.
Uh-huh.
So they weren't assigned to hell, but they weren't allowed to stay in heaven. And so they inhabit a fairy world, which is sort of akin to our world. But in order to stay there, they have to pay what's called a tithe to hell every 7 years, meaning they have to sacrifice a human to the devil in order for the fairies to stay in the fairy world. So one piece of lore about the Fairy Queen is that every 7 years she comes to our world and finds a young, handsome man, takes him back with her to the fairy world, and then at the end of 7 years, kills him.
Is that where the 7-year itch comes from?
I'm not really sure, but seven is a magical number. You see it appear often in folklore and fairy lore. The 7 dwarves. Of course, there's 7 days of the week, and there's 7 classical planets. The Greeks and Romans knew of 7 heavenly bodies, so those are called the 7 classical planets. You see the number appear fairly often in folklore. I think the 7-year itch may be based more on human behavior. I know guys who get a 6.5-month itch.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I suppose so. But yeah, the Fairy Queen lore is there's a lot of it in my book, and it's a very interesting lore because she's, on the one hand, she's very tender and she treats these men with an enormous amount of love. And then on the other hand, she's kind of heartless and just, okay, well, I'm done with you. You're dead. So, and the record we have about the Fairy Queen, the primary record is from two songs, traditional British songs that could be as old as 1,000 years old, in which the two men involved in the two songs actually survive and come back to our world. One because his human lover rescues him, and the other because the Fairy Queen takes pity and loves him and sends him back to our world instead of killing him. So she's kind of a paradox, the Fairy Queen, like many women are.
Indeed. Now, a lot of the one I was knowing the most about was Mab. The one I've heard about the most.
Right.
Now I think she was always kind of associated with winter, with cold, at least from some of the stuff that I've read, and then
Right.
some of the more, I guess what they call the unseelie court or so forth. Now the
Right.
Summer
And
Queen.
the unseelie court comes to us from Irish lore, whereas Mab comes to us from English lore. So there's a lot of commonalities, but there are two different human races of people who have shared folklore over the centuries.
So now, how about the Summer Queen? Is there a difference between the two in the actual folklore, or?
Well, that depends largely on who you speak to. I don't see a difference. I think Mab is the queen of fairies, whether it's winter or summer.
Gotcha.
One of the reasons she's often talked about as, equated with winter is that winter is the time of death. And of course, one of the biggest pieces of her folklore is this idea of combing the earth to get this human to sacrifice. Also, there's lore about Mab that she rides through the forest on Samhain, which is the Irish word for Halloween, and gathers up the spirits of crops that we've killed by harvesting them and of animals that we've killed by hunting them. And she leads these spirits into the fairy world or the underworld, where they'll rest and they'll be reborn in the spring as the new spirits of the crops and as the new animals born to deer and other hunted animals in the forest. In fact, our tradition of colored eggs on Easter comes from an older pagan tradition where you would paint eggs red and throw them into running water after a big celebration like we have. Yeah. And these eggs would be a message to these spirits in the underworld or in the fairy world that it's time for them to come awake and re-inhabit the crops so that the crops in the field can grow again. So all of that is equated with Queen Mab. So there's her spring aspect as sort of the mistress of the crops and the mistress of spirits in the spring, as well as her autumn aspect of, gathering up these dead souls, which is where we get a lot of our traditions of Halloween.
Now how do we get? Now I see the the coloring the eggs red, throwing. How did we end up turning it into a Christian celebration?
Well, it's an interesting question. Easter is one of the all Christian holidays have their basis in pagan holidays, and it's because Rome was a pagan nation, a pagan empire, and then it converted to Christianity. And you can't just tell people, okay, everybody, you've got this new God you're going to worship, so you've just got this new set of holidays. That's not a good way to, to convert people to the new religion. So instead, Rome just took all the Christian celebrations and sort of placed them over existing pagan celebrations. One of the big ones is Yule, the winter solstice, which became Christmas. But another one is Easter, which, this is the thing about Easter, they didn't even change the name. The original Saxon celebration is called Ostara, which is where Easter comes from. Of course, Esther in the Bible has that name, but it's an ancient goddess name, which is why Esther has it, and which is why Easter is called that. And a lot of the customs of Easter just stayed right where they were. Bringing a rabbit into your house, for instance, is a pagan custom that is a fertility celebration. It's spring. You want your crops to grow. You want your animals to grow. So
and you want to make babies.
But you want to make babies. So the celebration involves bringing a little rabbit into your house, and kids still do this. You know, good Catholic children bring rabbits into their house. And so the painting of the eggs is another Easter celebration that nobody ever bothered changing. It just, it just stayed where it was, and everybody just sort of accepted it as part of the new holiday of Easter. Jesus has risen, and we're going to paint an egg.
Yeah, that's
it does seem kind of silly when you think about it. Like, I don't know where we got that.
Well,
the Lord is risen, and we celebrate by painting eggs and eating chocolate.
Right, exactly. The thing is, at the time, these celebrations were still very important to people. Nobody wanted to give up the celebration of the return of life to the field because they would
kind of like
say,
tradition.
well, they would say, well, I want to be in the new religion, I want to worship Jesus, but I want my crops to grow.
Yeah.
So I'm going to continue honoring these old spirits because I'm not really sure yet. There's no track record yet. We don't know that Jesus is going to make the crops grow. Let's hedge all of our bets.
Little pieces at a time, baby steps.
Right, one baby steps. And once these traditions became reaffirmed in the new religion, it's very hard to drop them. We have most people do traditions and they don't know why they do them. They just do them. Halloween, for instance. Yeah, yes, the average person, why do you dress up at Halloween? They can't tell you. They say, because I always have.
Because we want candy.
Because it's fun.
Because we want candy. But it is, of course, a fairy tradition.
Really?
It has to do with Queen Mab's ride, and it has to do with the idea that you want to dress as a ghost so that Queen Mab thinks you're dead and doesn't nab you and take you with her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never heard that before.
Power Ranger is not going to help you at all if Queen Mab rides by.
She doesn't want Power Rangers and ballerinas.
No, apparently not, because it's worked for centuries.
Now, is there any other thing that we do that we take as granted? We're talking about holidays. Is there anything else we take as granted that actually has a link to the fairy tradition or the fairy folklores?
Oh, so many things, and I talk a lot about them in my book, but I'll give you a for instance.
Okay.
A lot of little girls are members of the Girl Scout troop known as the Brownies.
Oh.
And the induction ceremony into the Brownies involves a little rhyme that the girl says in which she promises that, like a brownie, she's going to be helpful to her family and work hard to help her family.
Yeah.
Now, brownies are a kind of fairy. In England, they're called brownies, and in Germany, they're called kobolds. And these are the fairies that we see in the story of the shoemaker and the elves, where these fairies come into his house at night and make his shoes for him. They're very helpful fairies. And there's a thousands-of-year-old tradition in Germany that you want to try to capture one because they take the form of a 9-year-old child and they help you with the housework. And so this whole Girl Scout brownie troop is based on the idea of little girls acting like these particular fairies that help with the housework and are helpful to their parents.
Wow.
Yeah.
I never...
I just do about the cookies. That's all.
Right.
Thin Mints?
But again, a lot of times we don't question traditions. We don't really know where they came from, but they do, they didn't just spring out of nowhere. They have roots, and a lot of them have roots in fairy lore.
Now, excuse me.
I have another one for you.
Oh, okay.
You know that people have a custom of saying knock wood or touch wood. In England, they say touch wood, and in America, when you
knock on wood.
When you say, I hope I get my check in the mail, you say knock wood. This comes from fairy lore. Trees are inhabited by fairy spirits. And so when you make a wish and you don't want the fairy spirit to interfere with your wish, you would knock the tree, alerting the fairy that you don't want any trouble.
Oh.
And this is where knock wood comes from.
See, now I'd always wondered about that one, but there's a lot of kind of weird.
We're uneducated on our folklore.
I'm still at the brownies thing. Like I was trying to think, where the heck did I even think brownies meant?
I just figured because they made brownies.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
No, Jordan. Keebler elves aren't in your corner.
No, Keebler elves. I think that's a little Disney-esque kind of thing, but they do fit that mold of the kobolds who are helpful, and they're baked in that tree every day.
See, and I always think Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell really isn't a nice little fairy.
Oh, she's nasty.
Yeah, and everybody always thinks, oh, Tinkerbell, clap if you believe in fairies. Really, we should have just stayed silent.
We should let her die.
Tinkerbell, if you remember, one of the first things she does in the novel is try to get Wendy killed.
Yeah.
She tells the kids that it's a Wendy bird, and Peter told them to kill it, and they all fire their arrows at Wendy, and they do actually hit her, and Peter's got to restore her to life. Tink is, well, a lot of diminutive fairies, the small fairies. The folklore says that they're very tied to their emotions. They're very spontaneous and impulsive, which Tinkerbell is.
Mm-hmm.
They don't stop and think much. They just do what their emotions tell them to do. And often that's very bad for humans.
What about sprites? What's the difference between a fairy, an elf, and a sprite?
A sprite is a type of fairy or elf that's Tinkerbellish. They're small, they're diminutive, they're very energetic, which is why we use the term sprightly to refer to someone energetic.
Mm-hmm.
And they like to cause trouble. They're kind of like Tinkerbell in that respect. They're good workers, but they will sour your milk or frighten your chickens so they won't lay eggs. And in a lot of parts of rural Ireland to this day, people leave offerings to fairies like the sprite so that these creatures don't do those things to them. And in fact, a woman that I knew from Scotland who taught me a good deal about fairy lore when I was young used to say to me that you always refer to the fairies as the kindly ones or the good people. Not because you think they are, but because you want them to hear you saying good things about them so they won't bother you and so they won't play these tricks on you.
I've talked to a lot of people talk about the devil. They'll call him, the old gentleman, or
right.
And kind of in the same way of addressing him because you don't want to bring up his name.
Right. Well, and it's not just that with fairies you don't want to bring up their name, although that could be an element. It's that you want them to hear you say good things about them so they don't have it in for you and decide to bother you in the special way fairies will bother you.
That's kind of like why we keep.
This entire show's been, I don't know what I've done.
Nick's ears are smoking now. His brain's working on overtime.
Well, we should take a break, you guys.
Oh, okay.
And you going to hold on, Kenny, and we'll be right back to you? Okay.
All right, you're listening to Whispers Radio live at the Market House Grill in Elm Grove. We're still waiting for somebody to come and paint us green. You got a half hour left. Time is a ticking.
We could make arrangements if you don't show up.
Yeah, we could always extend our St. Patrick's Day to next week.
No, I was going to send money so they don't.
Nick was going to pay them off.
Oh, I see.
All right, stay with us.
Don't bring pain.
AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog. We'll be right back.
Listen, I hear dead people. Shut up, you idiot. That's just Nick, Jordan, and Lola with Whispers Radio, brought to you by the Market House in Elm Grove. Tune into Whispers Radio every Monday night at 6 p.m. on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog. And now back to Whispers, brought to you by West Virginia Penitentiary Tours.
Welcome back to Whispers Radio on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog, and UPRN, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. It is 7:35, and we are live at the Market House Grill in Elm Grove. Come on out and see us. They got For $10, a bucket of beer and a pound of wings. $1 domestics and $2 well drinks. Going on until 9 o'clock tonight. Come on out. Good times to be had. We are on the phone right now with Mr. Kenny Klein. We are talking about fairy spirits, leprechauns, sprites, brownies, the Queen Fairy. We're talking about it all. It's our St. Patrick's Day episode. A couple days early, but we like to get a head start. Kenny, you still with us?
Yeah, I like to get a head start on St. Pat's myself.
You know,
I make a good deal of my living playing music.
Yeah.
And I did my first St. Pat's gig on Saturday night, so that was a good head start.
Nice. See, what I look forward to most of this time of year is the Shamrock Shake.
Shamrock Shake.
From McDonald's.
Oh, I haven't had one, and now that you said that, I may have to go and find myself one.
It's a mint shake.
It's pretty much amazing. Like, when you taste it, you're like, wow, this tastes like amazing. Not that I'm plugging McDonald's or anything. They're not paying me any money. We're going to have to beep that out in the podcast.
They don't make it with real shamrock.
In fact, this time of year, he subsidizes quite a bit of... He's paying them quite a bit of money.
Yep.
All right, so when we're talking about leprechauns and stuff like that, I mean, I was even talking on the morning show this morning about, you see the Lucky Charms guy, with the marshmallows and the running from the kids. Is anything like that, the I guess the sight of what a leprechaun is? Do they, children chasing them and likes marshmallows?
The whole leprechaun myth sort of took on a life of its own when the Irish came to America, and there was this sort of mingling of American perceptions of the Irish themselves mixed with the idea of this fairy creature, the leprechaun with the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Gold plays in a lot of fairy lore, and especially what happens in many true fairy tales, as opposed to, when I say fairy tales, I mean stories about actual fairies.
Yeah.
As opposed to the label that people use, fairy tales, which often in our culture means something that isn't true. Oh, that's a fairy tale, meaning it's not true. Originally, fairy tales were meant to be understood as truth. One of the things that happens in fairy tales a lot is that a fairy creature will give you gold, and as soon as the fairy creature leaves the scene and you look at this gold, it turns out to be dry leaves and sticks.
Happened to me a lot.
This idea of the leprechaun with the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow may come from those legends of the fairy who gives you what appears to be gold, but it's certainly not when you hold it to the cold light of morning. There's a very well-known Welsh tale in which this human king receives a gift from the underworld of pigs, and they're the first pigs that have ever existed on Earth. And he loves these pigs, I mean, who wouldn't? And he's challenged by a sort of another worldly or fairy king, and they come to an arrangement that the fairy king will buy the pigs for a big bag of gold, and the human king gives the fairy king the pigs, and then when he gets back to his camp, he opens the big bag of gold, and it's leaves and sticks. And so they end up having a little showdown. The thing is, sword fights against fairies never turn out well for the human. He gets killed, and the fairy goes off with the pigs, and that leads into the next story. But these are Welsh tales, and of course the Welsh are Celts like the Irish, and so you see the presence of gold in a lot of fairy tales. But it's never good person,
Now, as a leprechaun,
fairies seem to have the last word on a lot of the gold issues. Yeah.
Now, are leprechauns that we're talking about how kind of a vicious, a lot of deaths around a lot of the fairies. Are they closer to the idea of, like, I guess the Lucky Charms cereal guy, or closer to the movies, with the leprechaun and the cheesy kind of movies that, where he's killing everybody?
I would discount both.
Okay.
I would say that cereal manufacturers may not be the last word on fairy lore. And I would also say that Hollywood producers may not be the final word on fairy lore. I would say that leprechauns are going to be, maybe somewhere in the middle. I don't know that they're as cute as the serial paints them into being, but I don't know that they're as murderous as the movie. I think they get more pleasure from taunting humans than they do from killing humans.
And that seems to be all of the fairies seem to have the more of the taunting, kind of pranking.
But I get it because he's taunting him with cereal and marshmallows,
Well, there
and
you
they're
go.
they're like chasing after him. He's like, whoa, maybe
Yeah.
not so much like that.
Always after me, Lucky Charms. I my feeling, and this is something I say in the book, Through the Fairy Glass by Kenny Klein on Llewellyn. One of the things I say in the book is that my feeling from all the research I've done and getting to know fairies as much as I have is that fairies don't always really understand our limits. They think they can, it's like a kid who breaks their toy because they don't really know how much they can do with that toy before it'll break. I think that fairies often see us as playmates and don't really realize that we don't necessarily have the same tolerances that they have.
Huh? That's a good way to look at it. Now, what about like the banshee? Is the
No, the
banshee
banshee.
a
Now,
fairy spirit?
the interesting about the banshee is that, and this is something I didn't even know until I began researching for the book.
Uh-huh.
Banshees, while they will sing when someone dies, that's called keening. Keen. Keening is a very stylized type of singing that is done by the Irish and other folks when someone dies. And banshees will keen when someone is about to die, but they're better known as herders of deer. Banshees are very, very beautiful young women who will live in the forest, and they will herd deer the way humans herd cattle. And if anyone tries to hurt their deer, they are not nice to them. They will kill them. So if you're a hunter and you're hunting deer and you happen to hunt a deer that a banshee has claimed as part of their herd, they will do very bad things to you. But of course, there is this legend that certain old Irish families have banshees attached to them, and that when anyone in this family is going to die, the banshee will start keening before the person has died. And there's a lot of almost contemporary stories from within the last 100 years of people who have heard banshees keening and then someone died. In fact, there's a story that comes from your neck of the woods, the Ohio River Valley,
Okay.
about a woman named Mary Marr who settled in the Ohio River Valley after the Civil War, so as early as the early 1900s.
Uh-huh.
And apparently, a very beautiful woman appeared to her on a horse at dawn and said to her, don't look for your husband; he's not coming home. And she found out later that her husband had accidentally fallen into a river and drowned. His body was washed up days later.
Wow.
So this seems to be a record of a banshee in the Ohio River Valley.
That's pretty cool that it's close to home.
Yeah.
Now, where do people get like screaming like a banshee?
Well, because of the keening, because of the way they sing when someone dies. It's not a scream, but it's a sort of, if you ever hear bagpipes, it sort of sounds like that. And I imagine one could hear bagpipes and think that somebody's angry or screaming. I have a lot of bagpiper jokes because I'm a fiddle player, and bagpipers and fiddle players don't like each other much.
Now, why is that?
Well, they're louder than us.
I can understand that. I like the bagpipes, but there's nothing can beat a good fiddle. Now, have you ever had to?
You go.
Have you ever had to play the devil for a fiddle of gold?
I charge by the note.
Okay, gotcha.
$10 a note, and there's a heck of a lot of notes in that song.
There you go. Now, quick question about. I've been reading a lot of kind of urban fantasy stories and other books, and a lot of them are starting to introduce fairies back into the stories. I know the series we interviewed last year Jim Butcher with the Dresden Files, and he deals with the Sealy Court, Unseelie Court, and they tend to be more of the nastier kind of going back into the older folklore. A lot of them though talk about uh, the only way you can really kind of hurt a fairy is with silver weapons or steel weapons or something like that. Now, is there any folklore or tradition with that?
Absolutely. All through the fairy lore, we see that iron will banish fairies. And
that's right, iron. That's true.
Iron, yeah. The way to protect yourself from fairies, don't use silver because they love anything sparkly and glowy. That'll just get them
I'm making notes.
To you. But iron will banish fairies, and throughout the fairy lore, you see instances of people who have saved themselves from being killed by fairies by having iron on them. One of the things that a lot of fairy lore says is that if you're walking late at night in the forest, you should always have with you some little piece of iron, a nail, for instance, or a horseshoe. And the tradition of hanging a horseshoe in your house, and they say, oh, it's good luck. Well,
yeah, I was going to ask that too.
Is actually the good luck is not being killed by fairies.
Well, that is always a good way to end the night.
Yeah. So the horseshoe comes from fairy lore, and it's about protecting your house from fairies. It was very much believed, especially in Ireland, that a pregnant woman or a newborn child are very susceptible to fairies, and that fairies will try to steal a newborn baby and leave a fairy in its place. That's called a changeling.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
And so one of the things that you would always do is you would put some iron tool, like a knife, into the wood at the head of the crib of a newborn baby to protect it from fairies.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about dwarves?
Well, dwarves come to us specifically from very northern Scandinavian lore, Norwegian and Sweden, Norway, Finland. These are countries where people believe in dwarves, and the dwarves are part of this mythology. They're not legend or fairy lore so much as they are mythic. The dwarves were a race that existed from the time that the gods existed and before humans existed, according to Norse mythology. And the dwarves were very like Disney's Seven Dwarves. They would mine in the earth, they would dig precious metals out of the earth, and they would use these to make beautiful things. The goddess Freya, who is a goddess of love, she's very like the Greek or Roman goddess Venus or Aphrodite. She actually had relations with 4 dwarves to get them to make her a beautiful amber necklace from amber that they had mined from deep in the earth. So the dwarves of Norse mythology are not, they don't fit the fairy mold as much as they fit the mold of mythic creatures. And they have fought wars with both the gods and with humans. They're not nasty the way fairies are pranksters, but that you don't want to mess with them. Tolkien really portrayed dwarves in the way that mythology portrays them. His dwarves are very like Norse mythology, and they mine. And if you've read Lord of the Rings, or saw the movie, you know that the dwarves build these deep, deep mines, so deep into the earth that they wake these nasty buggers that are down there and have to fight against them. And of course, in Tolkien's book, it doesn't go well for the dwarves. But that's certainly very similar to the Norse mythology of dwarves.
Well, what about trolls?
Now, trolls, again, they're a very old myth. The word troll comes to us from Old English. And they seem to also be mythic as opposed to legendary. They come from very old mythology, and they're the nasty buggers, and they seem to live in dark places like caves. One of the fairy tale myths is that they live under bridges.
Yeah.
And they, when goats try to cross the bridge, the troll attacks them.
Yeah.
There seems to be some record of trolls eating people or eating livestock. So you don't want to run into a troll in the dark alley.
How did you get so involved with all of this? My God, you're just, you just
it's like
have so much information about all of this stuff. How'd you ever?
Well, while my friends were busy learning skills that could get them jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've always played music. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been a musician. Mm-hmm. And I got very interested as a teenager in traditional British, Irish, Scottish music. And of course, all of those musical styles and those cultures talk a lot about fairy lore. And it just it really interested me as a teenager. I really got involved in, learning more. Like you say, Queen Mab. I got really into Queen Mab, and I wanted to read about her. And so I began learning everything, all the songs that I could and all the tales that I could. And it's just been a lifelong quest. And then Llewellyn was nice enough to actually, allow me to write books about it and publish them so that I can use these skills for
good.
Something other than, I don't know, entertaining my friends or whatever. But, it's just been a lifelong interest of mine. And I happen to be a scholarly type of fellow, and I like to learn things. So that's what I kind of devoted myself to learning, was folklore. And I got a degree in folklore, so I guess I haven't wasted that degree. The good people of New York bought me a nice degree for a reason, I suppose. Yeah.
Now, in the book description, it says, and I have to ask, it says you also offer up practical tips for those who dare to visit their world. Now,
yeah, my most practical tip is don't.
Okay.
That is a good one.
Nice.
Don't eat the food. Every time in folklore somebody eats the food when a fairy is around, bad things happen. Of course, there's a very famous story of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, where Rip Van Winkle, Washington Irving has several tales that take place around this little village of Sleepy Hollow on the Hudson River. In Washington Irving's story of Rip Van Winkle, he drinks the beer. He finds these little men playing. They're bowling. They're playing ninepins, which is bowling, in the woods. And they offer him beer, and he drinks it. And what happens? He goes to sleep, and he wakes up, and it's 100 years later. And this happens a lot when people eat the food or drink the drink. Bad things happen to them. So that's one tip that I offer, is don't eat the food. That comes in between number 1, where I say don't go there, and number 3, where I say, and by the way, don't go there. So yeah,
I'm seeing an idea forming.
Yeah. What's that?
I said I see the idea you're trying to get at there.
The idea I'm getting at is don't do it. But I give the disclaimer: if you're going to do it anyway, don't blame me for whatever happens.
Now, is there a lot of people? I mean, I was saying, now, do you believe that these creatures actually exist? I have to ask.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, you do believe that? I was going to say, because there are a lot of people that actually have this belief. That still kind of, like, I've always heard, people leave out some milk, right. on the floor. Of course, I always thought that would just attract rats or mice or something, but.
Well, there's a lot of people who do believe in this stuff, and let me say that these beliefs and these stories and tales have existed for thousands of years.
Uh-huh.
And one of my basic, rules of life is that when you have stories and beliefs that have existed for thousands of years, there's got to be some basis to them. People need to believe in them for some reason. And I think for most of the time these beliefs have existed, it was a warning. It was telling people, hey, here's what's going to happen if you mess with fairies. And then after the Industrial Revolution began and people stopped living so close to nature, they became entertainment. For instance, Disney, has fairies because they're funny and fun. But I think for most of their lives, tales were about warning people not to eat the food and not to drink the drink. And
don't go there.
Yeah, don't go there, exactly. There are a lot of warnings to young women about not getting involved with fairy lovers, because apparently, according to the songs, this happened all the time,
Now, because we have a couple minutes left, what is your most, because you've researched it all, what is, story that you could tell us that a lot of people haven't heard about, but you find the most fascinating?
Well, I find them all pretty fascinating. Are you asking me to tell you a story or just reference something?
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of good stories in my book, which is Through the Fairy Glass by Kenny Klein.
Uh-huh.
I think my favorite story is probably the tale of Queen Mab. I'm very drawn to her. And one of the things about Queen Mab is that we still use a lot of expressions and vernacular that comes from fairy lore. When Queen Mab rides through the forest on Samhain, which is Halloween, gathering up these spirits that were killed in the hunt and the harvest, it's a very scary thing. We call it the wild ride. And it makes a lot of noise, and there's baying of hounds and screaming of these spirits. And if people are close to where the wild ride is passing through, they'll have horrible dreams.
Really?
And because Queen Mab rides this huge white horse, this white mare, we still use the term that when you have bad dreams, you are riding the nightmare. And that's where that comes from.
Oh.
Yeah, the lore of Queen Mab. We have a lot of expressions that we still use that have to do with fairy lore, like knockwood. That's a good one. But Queen Mab is probably my favorite fairy and my favorite story. She's my favorite in the way that volcanoes or tsunamis are people's favorite event in nature. You don't want to stand in one, but there's people who like watching them from afar.
Yeah.
Well, Kenny, we are out of time, and I want to let you know we have your book up on our website. You can click on a picture of it, and it'll take you right to the Amazon site, correct, Nick?
Excellent.
And that way, any of our listeners want to really delve into this topic, get there, get the book. Do you have the website up too, Nick?
Yeah, I got his website up. We'll have to maybe get some songs from you so we can play it at the beginning of the show sometime, if you'd like.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Great. Just send us an email. Nick can email you out and make sure you know the address. Kenny Klein, thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
We'll have to have you back on. There's a lot of questions I still have.
Yeah. And who doesn't like a good
fairy story?
Fairy story.
Fairy story, yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks,
thank
Kenny.
you.
Thanks, Kenny.
All right.
Happy
St. Patrick's Day.
What I'll be playing fiddle at a mall in Tustin.
Okay.
There you go.
Which is in California. It's sort of, I don't know, how do you describe Tustin? It's like I can't even, it's, what's 40 miles outside of any major city near you that is very suburban. That's what it's like.
Okay.
All right. I got you.
Well, thanks, Kenny.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kenny. Well, Lola, nobody took us up on the paint us green thing.
Damn it.
You'll have to catch us next week.
I guess.
A post painting.
Jordan and I are going to end up killing ourselves over this remote box.
He's got like a nervous tick where he's got to touch the dials and spin them all.
Geez.
Well, I like to keep them down because there's a lot of feedback.
But he doesn't just keep them down.
Yeah.
He'll like turn it up, turn it down, turn it up, turn it down. So I told him, just lay off my knob.
Keep your fingers off the equipment.
Lay off my knob.
Oh, God, Jordan, I can't believe you just said that.
And he'll be apologizing for that one next week.
But if he doesn't start each show off with an apology for something, I feel as though he's been cheated somehow.
Remember at the beginning when we first started, and you're like, stop apologizing for everything.
I know, but I'm learning that there are certain things that do need the apologies given.
and then you heard me do a show, and you're like, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I know it.
We got 10
guys,
minutes.
hurry up. We only got less than a minute.
We got next week?
All right, well, next week we have Frank Ficino talking about, he just had a show on Monster Quest called Lizard Men.
Yeah, and it's going to be on again because I looked it up.
It's going to be on again.
Yeah.
And Stan Friedman's in there, Frank Ficino. So
it'll be a good time.
Yeah.
All right, until next week, everybody, happy St. Patrick's Day. Until then, don't be afraid, only believe.